Yeah, and a dead phone. So
We're live.
he doesn't even know I'm here. Can't get hold of him.
Did you get your camera working? Okay, can you check if your phone is streaming?
She's just like you.
Right on.
Maybe worse. You're in a bad place, Dad. You're in between four women.
Maybe I took the bad spot.
I know that.
It's a great idea.
It's so nice to see you travel past your degree.
Yes.
I watched your every step of the way to the
Fish talent. But I'm not getting angry with that. Keep it moving. Yeah.
Legal, you're required.
Nobody's joining in the back. Oh, a few there.
There's a few, yeah. Where are you from?
East River.
Okay.
Yeah. You guys?
Slave Lake here.
Yeah.
Are you part of this group?
I am. Somehow I got pulled in, and now I'm jumped. I'm hooked as well. Yeah,
How's it coming?
it's growing fast.
Yeah.
The events in the south are crazy right now.
Like in southern Alberta?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they're full house, standing room. If they have chapter meetings, they invite 10, then they get 50 or 60 people. Everybody wants to
Well, that's how you
participate.
get started, right?
Yeah, but Fort Mac, not so much. Sandy assures me it's going to get going here
In Fort
again.
Mac.
Here, Sandy's the trucker that
Sandy Williams, yeah.
put this together.
Yeah, we were with him in Ottawa.
Oh, you did go.
Yeah.
So we just need a chapter leader here, and then you have your first meeting. We could share you who's members already, and then you think you're going to get 10, and I bet you'll have 50.
Yeah.
And then you choose a leader from that group, and every week, all the chapter leaders around the province call in at a Zoom, and we update and we give the educational material. We have guest speakers. We talk about youth. Update on what events are coming up. I lead that meeting. So,
Okay.
yeah. But Sandy hasn't participated. But I kind of nudged him today. And he's been busy on a few other things, but he's saying he's going to put a little bit more effort. But I also remind him it may not be him, and that's okay. If there's somebody else in Slave Lake, we just need that name and have somebody interested in participating. 130 chapter leaders across
There
the
was
province.
somebody here in Slave Lake that's kind of. What?
That's your chapter leader? No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
There's a lady at our store that she says she's working with the APP. At least I thought she said she did.
I'm just checking that spreadsheet. There might be someone. I'll confirm with you.
So what's your name?
Reg.
Red?
And yours?
George.
George and Margaret. Margaret. Nice to meet you.
Originally from La Creek, but we moved here back in the winter of 96, 97.
So what's your last name? Unro?
Dreja.
Well, people are seeing it. There go my thing. Better go get my proper glasses.
Just be careful what I say now. We're live?
Yeah, actually you're live.
Where's the mic?
It's picking up the room mic. Somehow it's not passing through, so I got to figure out. That's the next step, I guess.
Usually when you're from La Creek,
Ah.
your last
That would explain.
Peters? Pete Peters? I have one of my cousins married a guy from a Reed, Clinton Reed, and married my cousin.
Keep talking.
Sandy's
That's good.
listed on Kinuso.
Okay.
Laurel McKenzie is listed for slavery.
Okay. Yeah, she was at our store. Yeah.
Check, testing,
I'll
1,
second
2. 1, 2, check.
What do you sell?
Healthy choices. Looks like we got some
I downloaded Reader, and then I go notice the directors, and then it says this thing.
That means it won't run on the phone. Let me see.
Everybody be in the dance at the Alberta Prosperity Project.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started here. If you want to take your seats, please. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to this event in Slave Lake, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, Solutions for a New Alberta. We are a group of grassroots Albertans with no politicians at our table, committed to inspiring, advocating, and educating all Albertans on how we can achieve freedom and prosperity through independence. We are all just regular people like all of you. Just a group of hardworking Albertans who have had enough of tyrannical, corrupt, top-down government, and we're going to try to do something about that. I'd like to invite Tanner Hnidey to open the event with a prayer.
I'd like to bow if you will offer a quick prayer. Lord, I thank you so much for this day. I thank you for the sun and that farmers are getting ready to start seeding. I pray that you would bless them this year and that their crops would grow healthy and strong. I thank you for allowing us to be here today. I thank you for everyone who has shown up. I pray that we would all make new friends and that we would have just an enjoyable evening tonight. In the name of Christ, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Tanner. Okay, so my name's Shannon Packham, and I am from Patricia, Alberta, which is nowhere near here. I'm a teacher, but I have not been in a classroom since the end of February of 2020. And it was then that I realized that if you don't stand up for what is right, then you must understand that you are part of what is wrong. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." We are certainly experiencing such times today, and the Alberta Prosperity Project has great suggestions on how all Albertans can face these challenges more successfully and prosperously. And I hope that the presentations that you're going to hear today will help to inspire you to go out and be empowered to spread this message as well. Okay, so this is how our events work. We have guest speakers, And then we have questions, a period of questions, and we have a break. You can have some coffee, it's over here. And then we have more guest speakers, and then I give you some homework and you all go home. Sounds pretty easy. So if during one of the presentations you think of something that has been brought up, you just go over to the table over here. The ladies have some index cards, and write your questions on there. And when you're having the question period, I ask the questions, the presenters answer them, and then we move on. So if you're going to write a question on the index card, I'd like you to write it in your best penmanship. Please. The bathrooms are just out this door and to the right. There's an exit at the back door and an exit at the front. I'm not sure where those doors go, so let's use that one and that one. What else? We are live streaming this event, so if you could go to our Facebook page, it is Alberta Prosperity Project with the blue background with gold letters, and if you could like the page, like the post, and share it with a couple of friends, that would be helpful. When you came in the door, you passed the the membership table, and there's also the petitions over there. Dennis will touch on the petition a little bit later. The memberships start at $20, and we do count on memberships and donations to keep this project rolling across the province. So we appreciate that. On this side of the room, we have our merchandise table. Jason and Jennifer are over there. They've got t-shirts and hats and stickers, and that helps us keep rolling as well. I would like to give a shout out to all of our volunteers. Without our volunteers, we're all volunteers, but without our volunteers, these events don't happen. So if you could give a round of applause for the people that are here volunteering, that'd be great. And also Sandy Williams and Sword Transport have donated this venue as well as the coffee. So we thank them. To our presentations. Our first guest is a resident of Edmonton, educated over 17 years at the Universities of Alberta, McGill, and Stanford. He is a recently retired 30-year heart and lung surgeon and critical care specialist. He is known as the North American pioneer of heart and lung transplants, implementing the first heart and lung transplantation program in Western Canada, performing the first heart transplant in 1985 and the first combined transplant in both lungs in 1986. The success of his programs grew to be the largest and most successful in Canada and one of the largest programs in North America. He has been recognized with numerous awards in medicine as well as community service. He is an exceptional community leader and a brilliant mind, and he has always advocated for the overall health and well-being of the people. He is a key driver of this project, one of the founders, and he is the CEO. And on top of all of that, he has had tremendous political influence in the eras of Premiers Getty, Klein, and Stelmach. He is here to talk to us today about Alberta's prosperity and freedom through independence. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dennis Modry.
Well, howdy, folks. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. The last few times that we've had a presentation, we've been doing like 3 or 4 a week, it seems, lately. And I always have to wonder what the audience thinks when Shannon talks about me spending 17 years in university. You all must think that I'm a real slow learner. Which may or may not be true. In case, I'll get on with things. I'm not going to speak too long, as I'm reminded by the quote from the famous actress Elizabeth Taylor to her 7th husband, "I won't keep you long." So with that, and I got my wife here, and she always says, "Be strong, not long." So you got to listen. You got to listen to that. Now, I like to poll the audience and determine where everybody's at. So we'll start with this question. How many people are pleased with the performance of our federal government? Please raise your hand. How about the performance of our Prime Minister? Seems to be a real dearth of hands going on. Well, you know, it's interesting because there was an Angus Reid survey reported on January the 4th that indicated that 73% of Albertans are disillusioned with the federal government. And my feeling is that the other 23% didn't know about the poll, probably. Now, how many people here are pleased with the performance of our provincial government? Raise your hand. So what that really tells you, ladies and gentlemen, is that nobody's happy with government. And obviously there's a lot of reasons for that. You might have many reasons of your own, but some thoughts are, what about corruption? What about making promises that they then don't keep? Or fiscal mismanagement, or high taxes, or abrogating your individual freedoms and rights, or frankly lying. Reminds me of a comment by Friedrich Nietzsche, who once said, "I'm not upset that you lied to me, I'm upset that I can't believe you anymore." Isn't that the way it is with government these days? So really, the question is, you know, what are we going to do about it? How many people here are here tonight because you're concerned about your individual freedoms, rights, and your prosperity? All right, so the majority of it. And it's interesting because 87% of Albertans, also polled by Angus Reid, reported on January the 14th, 87% of Albertans polled are concerned about inflation and the cost of living. Right?
Yeah.
And here's where we are, which reminds me of another story I got to tell you. I thought it was pretty funny. So my wife Lana and I were driving into Medicine Hat, where we had a very large function one evening a few weeks ago, and I was low on petrol. So I pulled into the Shell, and where the pumps pulled up to the pump, but it didn't have a card reader, so I had to go inside. And so I'm looking at the clerk behind this massive plexiglass barrier and a little window, and I say to him, "Can I have $10,000 on pump number 2? And he looks at me, deadpan, he says, "Would that be regular or V-power?" Yeah. So, true story. Any case, I don't know if you're aware of a gentleman by the name of Jack Mintz, but he's the chair of public policy at the University of Calgary, and he's advised many governments over the years, Alberta governments in particular. And he pointed out on November the 11th that ending our oil and gas industry will result in a 1/3 reduction in the average income of Albertans. Ladies and gentlemen, we truly are facing an existential threat to our very way of life, to our individual freedoms and rights and our prosperity if we do nothing. But I'm here tonight to tell you that if we come together for common cause and do something amazing that's never been done before, the future could be incredibly brilliant. And what is that? That's the essence of what the Alberta Prosperity Project is all about. It's to unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, and your prosperity, and your self-determination by enabling Alberta to chart a new path forward. What is that new path forward? And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's just touch on a couple of the freedoms or problems with our freedoms, as well as problems with our prosperity. So, how many people here would like freedom from being overgoverned, overregulated, and overtaxed? What about freedom from wokeness, cancel culture, critical race theory? Took a little while for you to get your hand up. What about freedom from the Great Reset? Yeah. All right. And what about freedom from corruption? I guess I know the answer to that because we've talked about that already. Absolutely. And let's look at, we don't really have freedom of speech anymore because, as you know, you can't have a conversation with somebody with whom you may disagree or they disagree with you without them referring to you as a racist. or in the South. We don't have freedom of movement still in this country. And it was a lot worse a number of months ago for a couple of years. We don't have freedom. We haven't had freedom of assembly and association. We haven't had freedom of religion. This has all been squashed through the COVID-19 mandates. And what about something really important? How many people here would like the freedom to own and enjoy property? Right. How many people here own their own property without a mortgage? If you think you own your property, just don't pay your property tax and you'll find out who owns your property. So the point that I'm getting at is that we don't even really have property rights in Canada, and that's not even in the Charter or in the Constitution, but it could be. One of the things that is most maddening to me is the freedom for families to be the moral, culture, and spiritual pillar to pass on to future generations values, principles, beliefs, critical thinking, responsibility, accountability, ethical behavior. Guess where that's been usurped? By the schools. And that has to go back to the parents. And that will go back to the parents if we come together for a common cause, which we're going to talk about in a bit. Now, how many people here have really looked at what the issues of concern are regarding the Great Reset? You've all looked at it. For those who haven't been, but just to put a fine point on it, I'll make a couple of notations for you. The Great Reset is really a highly influential movement by the global elites of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations in a contract called Agenda 2030, designed to reset the global economy and the actual structure and fabric of the way society operates, using banks, governance agencies, and environmental, social, and governance metrics to control billions of people on everything that they do, everything that they buy. And so the way it'll work is you'll have, and it's already been discussed in this province and in this country. And unfortunately, the UCP seems to want to trial a digital ID, which then leads to ultimately a digital currency. And then a social credit score, which is an environmental, social, and governance credit score that will grant you permissions depending on your compliance with the government. You'll own nothing and be happy, right? As Klaus Schwab said. This is one of the most dangerous socialist movements, Marxist movements, that can possibly ever happen if we do nothing. And then if we look at prosperity on the other side of the coin, we're blessed in this province by having the third largest oil resource. In Alberta, we have 97.3% of all of the known oil reserves in Canada. And yet, with that, the federal government wants to reduce the output in Alberta by 42% by 2030 and then phase it out altogether, either by or before 2050. But at the same time, they want to import oil from countries that don't have the same high quality social standards and environmental standards that we do. How does that make sense? And then, of course, we're vilified by the eco-alarmists and the radical environmentalists about CO2 emissions, when we only produce 0.15% of global CO2, which is inconsequential, totally inconsequential. Plus the fact they ignore that we have a massive carbon sink, over 320 billion trees, muskeg, agricultural lands, which soak up that CO2. It's been estimated by some that we are significantly carbon negative already. But yet, we're being forced to shutter our major industry that's improved the quality of life and the standard of living of thousands and millions of people in this country and around the world. One of the things I find interesting is if you're talking to people and you ask them this question, how many products emanate from a barrel of oil? Does anybody in the audience know the answer to that question? Somebody from Blackie, when we were chatting, had the best answer I've heard. He said all of them. I thought that was a really good answer. But it's actually over 6,000 products. I mean, everything that you can think of, including what wraps this cable, contact lenses, many components in your cell phone and your laptop. Just take a kid or anybody who is a real environmental. I mean, listen, we're all environmentalists. Nobody wants to destroy the environment, that's for sure. But if you take away their cell phone or their laptop and say they can't have it back until they really understand the value of the oil and gas industry, that'll help get them thinking. But you know, makeup, clothes, the roads we drive on, I mean, they're just medications, aspirin, Tylenol, anesthetic agents. I like to tell the story about without anesthetic agents, it would be going back to the time where the surgeon gives you a couple of shots of whiskey and it says, put this bullet between your teeth because it's going to hurt. Just bite down hard. No, we literally go back to the Stone Age without the oil and gas industry. And it's never going away, which may shock the environmentalists, but it is never going away. But we don't need to destroy Alberta's economy because of what some people think needs to happen. Now, one of the other interesting things to note is that for the people concerned about the climate in relation to CO2, well, since 1864, this is the first documented notation that someone was concerned about the environment related to climate change. Since 1864, there have been over 100 apocalyptic predictions that the Earth is going to end because of climate change. And here we are. Now, one of those apocalyptic predictions has come true. And more than that, what is really alarming, how many people here have read the Allen Report? Anybody know about the Allen Report? Steve Allen is a forensic accountant, and he was hired by the UCP to look at foreign government spending that has been used to shutter the development and transport of our natural resources. And in his report, between 2003 and 2019, $1.3 billion has been spent to harm you folks, to shutter the development and transport of our natural resources. 1.3 billion, where did that funding come from? Some of it came from you folks, you didn't even know it, because our federal government funded many of these non-government organizations and environmental organizations to advertise and to physically blockade the development and transport of our natural resources. Some of this funding came from competitive countries or competitive oil and gas industries in other regions of the world as well. So the question is, now, what about our prosperity from the perspective of confiscatory taxation? How many people here know that some $55 to $60 billion of federal taxes leaves this province every year, of which we get back about half? Think about what we could do with the rest of it. We overfund the pension plan by $3 billion a year. How many people would like to retain that $3 billion a year and massively increase, maybe double your pensions? I'll bet many of you would. And since 1965, nearly $700 billion has left this province, gone to Ottawa, and then elsewhere in Canada or in the world, much of it virtue signaling. Now, one penny of that has come back to Alberta. So we've done more than our share, no question about it. Now, so here we are, we've lost much of our freedoms. By the way, the truckers do represent freedom. And we're on the threshold of losing our prosperity, and pump jacks represent prosperity in this region in particular, but also throughout the world. So what are we going to do? We have three options. One is to do nothing, and the other two options are to chart a new path forward, one of two ways. Doing nothing reminds me of a metaphor that I coined, which is, imagine Alberta as a canoe on the Niagara River, and you're the inhabitants of that canoe, and you know which way it's drifting. And eventually you're going to hear the rush of the falls. And at some point you still have an opportunity to paddle like crazy to get to shore. At another point, it's too late, and you're going over the falls into the abyss of the hell of the Great Reset. And I don't think anybody here wants that. Raise your hand if you think that might be kind of a fun ride. You know, maybe in a barrel, and if you got lots of courage, you could give it a shot. So what else can we do? If that's not a future that we want, if that's not the direction to take, what else can we do? Well, we could consider fixing Alberta's circumstances within Confederation, or Alberta charting a new path forward as an independent, sovereign, constitutional republic. Those are the two options. How many people here would like Alberta to stay within Confederation, but with a much better deal? Maintaining Alberta's wealth, control of its social programs, etc. Okay. So, all right. So there's a few people. Generally, when I pose that question, about 10 or 15% of the audience says that they would like Alberta to stay within Confederation, but with a better deal and control of our own affairs. How many people here would like Alberta to get out of Dodge? And in general, that's the result that we see at all of these events. But I think it's very important to understand that for those people who want Alberta to remain in Confederation, but with a better deal, we need to ask the question, is it possible? And we've recently had a referendum on ending equalization, correct? And 62% of those people who were interested in voting did vote in favor of ending equalization. Now, here are the hurdles in order to end equalization. And think of it as a metaphor for ending any egregious program that harms Alberta's interests. There are really three major hurdles, and you can think about that. You can think of them from the perspective of history, the electoral imbalance, and the constitutional hurdles. And I'm not going to say much about history, but there's a lot I could say. If I had a lot more time, I would. But I want you to think that and understand that the fix was in before Alberta even became a province within Canada. And Alberta was incorporated into Canada in September 1, 1905, through the efforts of Sir Clifford Sifton, who was the Minister of the Interior in the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. But he said this in 1904, and this is why we know the fix was in. What he said was, we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enhance the prosperity of our people in the East. And in every way, build up our factories and our places of work by every legitimate means at that time. And what I missed in this quote was, we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies, the trade of the prairies is actually Alberta's wealth. And Canadian patriots were only those people that were living in the regions of Quebec and Ontario. And we started as a colony, therefore, in September 1, 1905, and 116 years later, we're still a colony. And what are we doing? We're continuing to transfer our wealth. We continue to be pillaged and plundered for the benefit of the East at Alberta's expense. And what I find really maddening, and for those of you who have been around for a long time, you'll understand that not one federal government nor one provincial government has ever protected Alberta's interests. So why would we think that it's possible to do it in the future? So that's just a little bit about history, but the electoral imbalance is important to understand as well. We don't have representation by population, and it wouldn't matter even if we did. And what I mean by that is if you look at the number of the MPs that are in the House of Commons, Prince Edward Island elects one MP for every 40,000 population, and Alberta elects one MP for every 130,000 population. And it's no better in the Senate. So what does that really mean? It means that every federal election will be decided by voter-rich Quebec and Ontario, and it doesn't matter the party that's in power, whether it be Liberal or Conservative. Because in order to get elected and in order to stay in power, you have to pander to the wishes of Quebec and Ontario, again, at Alberta's expense. So if you think you can end equalization or fix Alberta's circumstances of confederation, those are two things, a little bit of history and the electoral imbalance. Now then the third issue, which I think is where the rubber really meets the road, is the constitutional hurdles. In order to end equalization, in order to have control of the development and transport of our natural resources, in order to get out from under the Canada Health Act, and by the way, our health system functions at the lowest quartile and our costs are in the highest quartile. How many people here have waited inordinate lengths of time to get access to a physician or to have access to surgery? Yeah, and you probably know many people as well that are struggling, to wait. And it's the same thing with social programs as well, the social transfers. If Alberta's not compliant with everything that the federal government wants, then they just withhold the money that we give them, that they're supposed to give back to us for these various things. So, in order to understand the 5 constitutional hurdles to end equalization or anything else, here they are. Number 1, you have to have a majority vote in the House of Commons. Second, that has to be ratified by the Senate. Third, you have to have 7 of 10 provincial legislatures representing 50% of the population also voting in favor to end equalization or any other egregious program. And how do you think Quebec would vote? Because they get 2 of every $3 of equalization. So you see part of the problem here. And then the 4th hurdle is Quebec believes that it has a veto. And we just found out that it does, because they just vetoed the, I just forgot what it was now, but they just vetoed something recently, and so that basically proved that particular point. But there's another point that I'm going to make about the veto here in a second. The 5th hurdle is the Supreme Court itself. If you have a constitutional battle between the provinces and Ottawa, then it's the Supreme Court that will decide the outcome of that battle. And there are 2 things to be said about this. Constitutional battles don't take months and years. They often take decades to resolve. How much time do we have before we're over the falls?
Yesterday.
We don't, right. Now, when you understand the construct of the Supreme Court, with 3 justices from Quebec, appointed from the Prime Minister's office, 3 from Quebec, 3 from Ontario, 1 from the Maritimes, and 2 from Western Canada, you can see how even the Supreme Court will be biased in adjudicating a constitutional battle. And why we know that as well is because look what they did with the carbon tax. They had to twist themselves into a pretzel in order to approve a carbon tax, which is absolutely against the Constitution, which gives the provinces the right to develop and transport their natural resources. And if they can do that, you can be sure that they will permit a Quebec veto. I wish I could remember what the other thing was, but they just vetoed something, which the Supreme Court accepted. So if we can't fix Alberta's circumstances in confederation, then the alternative seems to be Alberta needs to chart a new path forward as an independent sovereign nation. But the reality is that we can't achieve either of those two paradigms without one thing, which is what you people can provide, and that's leverage. Alberta has no negotiating power. It cannot go to Ottawa and say, Jason Kenney can't go to Ottawa and say, look, we had an equalization referendum, and I want equalization to end. Now, there's no club. There's absolutely no way that we can open the Constitution and change it. Prime Minister won't go there. So the leverage that can give Alberta negotiating power is a successful referendum on independence, because that gives Alberta the moral and legal legitimacy to chart that new path forward. And that is perfectly legal. All you've got to do is read the Clarity Act and you'll understand how it is possible to achieve that objective. The Supreme Court has not only ruled that the country is divisible, but provinces are divisible as well, which brings up northern BC, which is fairly aligned, more aligned with Alberta than it is with southern BC, as an example. So what could then happen? What are we trying to do here? Well, what we'd like to see is at the 2023 election that a party is elected that will commit to these things, to protect your individual freedoms and rights, your self-determination and your prosperity, and hold an honest referendum on independence. Because then, between 2023 and the timing of the referendum, these are the things that would happen. That government would implement, and this is very much like the Free Alberta strategy as well, coined by Barry Cooper and Rob Anderson and Derek Frum, which would implement what's called the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And that would accelerate the process of legitimately, because this can be done within the Constitution legally now, take control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. And the latter then sets the stage, ultimately, for taking control of federal tax collection. In addition to that, there would be new banking regulations, which would ensure that Alberta Treasury Branch, as well as the credit unions, fall only under Alberta control, which will then protect depositors from CRA as well as from the federal government. That can easily be done. Then between, at about the 24-month to 30-month point after the 2023 election, you have the referendum on independence. Now, we also have on the table right now a petition that could accelerate that process, which you can have a look at. It was drafted by Jeff Rath, who's a constitutional lawyer, who's on our board. And I don't know if you've been following any of the litigation with Dina Hinshaw, but Jeff is one of the lawyers, along with Leighton Gray, that have been grilling her. Very smart guy. He's won a number of cases at the level of the Supreme Court as well. So he's drafted a petition. If you're interested in signing it, please do, because it could accelerate the process of having that referendum. Now, what is APP doing to help this whole process? Well, here's what it's doing. We are growing the membership really massively. We just started rolling out everything on February the 18th, and I'm actually really surprised at the massive growth. This is a nice crowd tonight, but we've had crowds of 1,400 people at many of the events as well. And what we want to do is we want to grow the membership to 500,000 to 1 million people or more. And why is that important? Well, it's important because you need to understand what is called the 3.5% rule. I learned this as well, and I've been politically involved behind the scenes for a long time, and I didn't know it until about 1.5 years or 2 ago. And basically what it is that term was coined by Erica Chenoweth, who's a Harvard professor. And she studied societal movements over a couple hundred years. And what she determined is that 3.5% of the population can change the direction of that society. When Jason Kenney was elected, he had 120,000 members. That's 3.5% of the voting electorate. If we grow the membership to 500,000 to 1 million people or more, we will absolutely control the outcome of the 2023 election. Ralph Klein used to say, how many people here are fans of Ralph? Ralph Klein, love that guy. He was a great friend. Anyhow, he used to say, find a parade and get in front of it. So APP is creating that parade. It's creating that movement where thousands of people are getting involved. Now, what we're doing to help accelerate the growth is not just having events like this, but we've also hired an international marketing and advertising company by the name of Rapid Boost. And so we're rolling out, and we're just starting we're rolling out massive educational campaigns throughout the province on every social media platform and every media platform out there. So Rebel News, Western Standard, the Legacy Media, Touch Broadcasting Canada, etc. But perhaps even more important is we're setting up educational chapters throughout the province. I thought a number of weeks ago that we would just maybe set up 90 to 100 educational chapters throughout the province. And I just heard a few days ago, we're already at 130 educational chapters. And I think Shannon will give an updated number, but my understanding is there's about 49 more that are in the wings of being set up, with the prediction that by the end of May, we may have 250 to 300 chapters set up. And why that's really important is because if we have 10 people in each chapter, and each individual in that chapter, for example, signs up 100 members, well, if you have 300 chapters, that's 300,000 members right there. So this is how we're building the movement, through education, and as well in colleges and universities as well, because we need to access the young people. They like Instagram and TikTok, so they're going to get a lot of their messages on social media that way. And so I'm going to end now my presentation really and just make a couple of key points. Folks, freedom is not free, and you really cannot have prosperity without freedom. Remember those who died for our freedoms and rights. It's our turn to stand up and honor their memory for what they've done for us. And we're on the precipice, unless we stand together, unless we come together and make something happen. And my final comment is what I like to tell the residents that I was training in cardiac surgery. There are three kinds of people in this world. Those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what the hell happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Our next presenter is from Lloydminster, Alberta. He is a brilliant industrial organization economist and a published author. He is a speaker and commentator on political and ethical issues and has studied under some of Canada's foremost economists. With his keen interest, wit, and bright mind, he offers so much perspective to the Alberta Prosperity Project, and he is here to demonstrate the many merits and benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. He is also our acting VP Economics. He cares deeply about the state that Alberta finds herself in and about how intrusively our governments meddle in our economy in order to facilitate our ruin. Here with an economic forecast for the independent nation of Alberta, Mr. Tanner Hnidey.
well, you'll have to excuse me because today we'll be talking about energy and electricity. But they're very particular markets. Electricity is a very special market because it's so complicated. And you can tell I'm an economist because no one would get excited about electricity except for an economist with the market. But there are so many intricacies in it that make it extremely complex. And when it works, when it comes together, it's fantastic to see. And we'll detail how that works throughout the speech, which also means that the speech is detailed more like perhaps a lecture than maybe more of an interactive speech. So you'll have to, if it's a little dry, you'll have to forgive me, but we'll do our best. So at present, it's most unpopular and unwelcome to talk about the function and importance of fossil fuels. In Alberta, it's welcome, of course. It's a welcome conversation, and we're different here. But across the expanse of the country and bunkered down in Ottawa is the sentiment that those who express their allegiance and absolute support for oil and natural gas and coal and other politically incorrect fuels are backwoods, backwater barbarians. But the fact of the matter is that, contrary to what the socialist believes, producing oil is moral, producing oil is civilized, and producing oil has done more to eliminate poverty, hunger and homelessness and suffering than anything that has ever been offered by renewable energy. So it's not backwoods, it's not backwater, and it's not barbaric. But even the most iron and conservative politicians cower in the face of a demand to withdraw from any pledges to, quote, go 100% renewable and 100% green, because in their eyes, to do so, a refusal to support wind and solar is the same thing in their mind as committing political and social suicide. Now, as you know, the federal government has promised, well, they've promised a lot of things, but they've promised to reduce nationwide emissions by 40 to 45% from 2005 levels by the year 2030. That's their promise, that's their push. And then, of course, they want to go net zero by 2050. That's also one of their promises. Now, you, like me, always hear about the heaven of renewable energy and this heaven that awaits us once we accomplish and complete the bureaucratic task that has been laid out for us. Once we're there, they say it's paradise. But we never hear of the torment that we might have to go through, or actually that we will have to go through and endure to get to that heaven. That is, there are benefits of a policy and there are losses. And we only ever hear of the benefits, it seems, because in their innocence, the federal government has neglected to detail the costs of green energy. But they don't need to apologize, because I am here today in place of government to tell you myself. Well, you're welcome. Oh, yes. So in the first place, the federal government's objective, climate objective, and climate objectives are not insignificant, but they are perhaps ironic, considering that emissions in developing nations are increasing at a rate more expansive than emissions are decreasing in nations like ours, in developed nations. So, for every, I'm just using an example here, for every ton of carbon that Canada eliminates,
This is my first time using
in
this
eastern countries, perhaps 2 more tons of carbon are exhausted. So you see, our policies are ironic, but nevertheless, dismiss the irrationality of these policies for a moment, in order to perform the analysis. So, suppose that government thrusts forward to transform the country into a totally green paradise. It's called a paradise. And eliminate all fossil fuels, every single one. They want to totally eradicate. Now, this scenario might sound extreme, and for the moment, It is extreme, but I don't think it will be for very long, because the radical ideologue, again, as you know, is not satisfied until every demand that he has is met and fulfilled. So, suppose you wanted to transition the whole of Alberta's electrical generation and electrical grid to renewables. You wanted Alberta to run on nothing but renewable fuel. That was the objective. That was the aim. Suppose that you wanted to phase out, which is just semantics for the word destroy, oil and gas with wind and solar. How much would it cost? That's the question. How much would it cost? If a wind turbine rated at 2 megawatts per hour, which is what many turbines size are, they can produce 2 megawatts per hour of power, actually did produce 2 megawatts of power per hour, every hour, the calculations would be simple, they'd be easy. But the turbines don't do that. That isn't the way that wind works. Wind power is intermittent. Some hours the wind is gusty and the turbines generate at full capacity. So they're spinning quickly. Other hours the wind is stale and the turbines that were once spinning so fast are dead. They don't move. They're not generating power. And so what analysts do is they amalgamate the data over the course of a year and compare what the turbine is rated to produce versus what the turbine actually produced, you see. And what they do is they create a number called a capacity factor. And so they say the turbine is rated to produce this much power over a year. Here's how much the turbine actually produced. Now in Alberta, from a recent study that I was reading, that capacity factor is variable, of course, per turbine. It can be as low as 10%, and it can be as high as 50%. It's never 100%. It's never, ever 100%. It seems like the averages were between 27% and 50%, somewhere in there. So it's low. It's low. It's low. But there's other problems that are associated with wind turbines. For example, the power is random and it's variable. So you don't know when the wind is going to blow. It might be that the wind is gusting in the night and it's calm in the day, or it might be the opposite. It might be that 9 in the morning it's blowing at 60 kilometers an hour and at 12 it's gusting at 20 kilometers per hour. You don't know. You don't know when it's going to produce power. And this is a problem. It's a very serious problem. It's a problem because, as I mentioned earlier, the electrical market is a particular market. It's a special market. When you take 1 megawatt of power out of the system, you have to simultaneously put 1 megawatt of power back in to the system. You see, the two can never be out of equilibrium, because if you do that, then the whole system becomes out of flux. Your electronics fry. So what you take out of the system, you have to put back in simultaneously. It's like it's like a husband. So if the husband is too hungry, he's upset, and if he's too full, he's upset. But if he's right perfect, then he's satisfied, and so is the rest of the house. No, well, there's more husband jokes coming, so you just wait. But if your source of electricity is random, if it's variable, if it's unreliable, how can you know if the electricity is going to be there when you need it? When Albertans are calling for power and the wind isn't blowing, what are you going to do? And so to overcome the problem, you build a battery. You build a freezer, right, to put the leftovers in. But it's a big battery. It's a very big battery. It is 2,470 acres up to 24,700 acres, which is 157 kilometers squared. It's bigger than the city of Red Deer. That's how big the battery would need to be. And you say there's a large discrepancy in the estimated size, and there is, and that goes to show you just how unpredictable the model has to be, because there are so many variables in determining how much power wind and other renewables can produce that you can't really get all that accurate. The most accurate we can get here is between 2,400 acres and 24,000 acres. There's a big discrepancy, which, as you can probably guess, is expensive. It's exceedingly expensive. $100,000 plus per household, expensive. And that's conservative, of course. It's a conservative estimate. And then you have the turbines. But just where are you going to build them? A 2 megawatt turbine, presumably, will produce more power in the south by Pincher Creek and Lethbridge, where it's exceedingly windy, than it will in the north. And it doesn't produce that much power to begin with, as I mentioned, because the capacity factor, how often it's turning and how often it's producing at full capacity, is quite low. And you say, is that really a big deal? It is, when you realize that last year, Alberta generated 70 million megawatts of power over the course of the year. 70 terawatts, or 71 million megawatts of power, which, that's not an unimpressive achievement. That's impressive. It's a lot of power, which means on average, and this is just for ease of calculation, Alberta produced 6 million megawatts of power. And of course, some months are higher than others. It's higher in the winter and lower in the summer. And that'll change this year too, because there's more oil production happening and so on. But let's just say it's 6 million megawatts of power every month, for ease of calculation. How many wind turbines would you need to satisfy that demand? Because remember, if people are calling for 6 million megawatts, you need 6 million megawatts. You have to have it. How many wind turbines would you need to satisfy that demand? With fossil fuels, you require about 15 to 16,000 megawatts per hour of generating capacity. So last year, I think our highest day in Alberta was 11,000 some megawatts an hour. We used a lot of power that day. It was hot, whatever it was, and that put a strain on the system. That was kind of its upper limit, its upper bounds. And so with fossil fuels, you need about 16,000 megawatts of capacity per hour. With wind turbines and renewables alone, you would need 52 million megawatts of production capacity. Just in Alberta, let alone Canada. This is just Alberta, which is not insignificant considering that each turbine is rated at between 2 and 3 megawatts. That doesn't even produce that throughout the year. It's unrealistic. It's impossible. That's exactly right. That's the point of the study, is to show it's totally impossible. It's completely illogical, totally infeasible. And these are not my numbers, just as a disclaimer. These are the numbers of a man named Dr. Cornelis van Kooten. He's brilliant, and he's perhaps one of the foremost scholars on this subject. The APP's views don't reflect his own, but he just released a study that details all of these things. A study called How Big a Battery, a study just on renewables, and what he concludes is exactly what you said, which it's totally impossible to switch entirely to renewables. You just can't do it, no matter how badly a society would want to. So you can understand how expensive it would be. The cost would be bankrupting. Just it's a number so vast our minds can't comprehend. And what Van Kooten finds is, he says, even under this model, that is not feasible. But even with this, 1 ton of CO2 reduction would cost $364,000. Unbelievably expensive. And it simply is not feasible. So, when you take those numbers, when you combine them and put them together and run them through the proper regressions and models, and compare them to what the federal government is proposing in its 2030 bill, if Canada, you discover that if Canada wants to achieve even 18.2% of its GHG emissions reduction program by 2030, not even 20%, if Canada wants to achieve that, it will cost us between $0.5 to $1 trillion. So if you wanted to achieve 100% of that, it'd be some $5.5 trillion. And that's a conservative estimate because this model is assuming perfect conditions. It assumes the batteries work, it assumes that turbines run at a set capacity and so on. So it's conservative. It's a conservative estimate. But there is a problem. This is what I find so fascinating. There's a problem with our plan to convince others of the insanity of this politically motivated, forced project, because the economic sanity of the environmental plan is of no consequence for the environmentalist. Whether you spend $1 billion or $1 trillion or $1 quadrillion, it makes no difference to him or her. It doesn't matter for them. Because they say we have to save the planet. Cost, in their eyes, in their minds, is a moot factor. Doesn't matter. And so then we adjust our argument and we counter with a moral response. So suppose your husband is now in the hospital because he was complaining, so you sent him to the hospital. And he's thrown on the operating table. Dr. Modry has to operate. When the procedure's in progress, Dr. Modry and the husband, they want confirmation, they want a guarantee that the diagnostic imaging and the machines and so on will not black out halfway through the operation. You might not want it, but the husband does. That is, when it's frigid, when it's sweltering, when it's nighttime, and when it's day. I want a guarantee that power will be there at my beckon and at my call. That's what I need. And I do. That's every civilized, industrialized country needs it. This isn't a selfish one. It's a product of living in this first world nation. With natural gas, this is possible. With coal, this is possible. But purely with wind and with solar, this is impossible. You cannot guarantee it. It's impossible. That is why, contrary to what the federal government says and does, we're thankful for Alberta's oil workers. We're unapologetic champions of Alberta's oil resources, and we are proud of Alberta's oil industry. Now, our friends in the media might say that an independent Alberta would run on nothing but oil and coal and coal, but they're wrong. That isn't right. That's not true. Not that the APP is advocating to tear down renewables. No, not at all. That isn't what we're advocating for. What we're advocating for is sound economic and market policy. What we're advocating for is rationality in the marketplace. And what we're advocating for is fair, lawful, equal opportunity for all individuals and businesses and Alberta corporations. That's what we're advocating for. It's not for the government to force you or to force me to adopt expensive, intermittent, unreliable forms of energy. That is not their job. It never has been their job, and it never will be their job. That's for you to decide, and that's for me to decide. If I want to put a solar panel on my house, fine. I have nothing wrong with that. If you want to put a wind turbine on your property, fine, by all means. Go ahead. That's totally fine. But the subsidies and so on for these renewables have to end. That's the issue. That's the problem. You see, in an independent Alberta, there wouldn't be subsidies for renewables purely because they're renewables. There wouldn't be benefits for environmentalists purely because they're environmentalists, and there wouldn't be privileged government positions and advantages for corporations purely because they're corporations. And it's then, among a whole host of other energy economic reforms and updates, that you would see Alberta's energy sector thrive. You would actually probably see more efficient renewable energy enter into the marketplace, and the new nation of Alberta would be one where on-demand, cheap, reliable energy would not be demonized, but would be championed. Thank you.
I've got about 7 questions. Only 7. Come up here. You guys? Did you forget the drill? Do you forget what we do?
The teacher talking.
They forgot.
By the way, while we're waiting for the microphone, I had to look up what I forgot, which was the Quebec veto. And it just came 4 days ago. And what they did was they legislated what they call Bill 96, which abridges the Canadian Constitution to disallow or to permit Quebec not to protect individual or minority language rights. Now, you may agree with that, but this was their veto of the Constitution. And what's interesting about it is they never even signed the 1982 Constitution. Anyhow, that was what I forgot to tell you.
The first question is, will we be responsible for the national debt?
Well, in my opinion, that would be a negotiating point, but I don't believe that we have any responsibility for the national debt. We've given them $700 billion since 1965. We didn't cause the national debt. We had no say in federal spending. And as a consequence of what this federal government has done, if you look at the Alberta debt clock, we already now have $123 billion of Alberta debt. Put that in the context of when Ralph was the premier, when he resigned in 2006, we had $36 billion in cash and assets on the books, no debt, a AAA bond rating, and we were the #2 GDP per capita region in the world and the lowest unemployment in Alberta history. So our opinion is that Alberta should take a position in negotiating independence by not agreeing to any component of the national debt. Now, that's what we would advocate for. What the provincial government in 2023, an independence-focused government in 2023 would do, we can't predict for certain, but we would certainly have the clout with 1 million or so Albertans saying, don't do it. We can absolutely stand on our own 2 feet. We would be so much more prosperous at every level. Like I said earlier, think about pensions being dramatically improved. But for those people employed and young people getting into the workforce, if they had to pay a flat 10% tax rate instead of progressive 45, 50%, whatever it's going to go to. And with this debt and this federal government, you can be darn sure that it's going to get a lot worse. Because why? Because they need tax dollars. So what does that mean? Your taxes are going up.
Could the federal government disallow the referendum, preventing us from becoming a sovereign nation?
The Supreme Court's already ruled on that. And that ruling comes with the Clarity Act. And it's absolutely crystal clear. Now, could they legislate something different? I can't say that would be the case, but the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, the lawyers there, John Carpe and James Kitchen, we've discussed that question. And also our constitutional lawyer on our board believe that would never happen. Like I say, the federal government asked the Supreme Court to rule on how a province or a region could separate. And their ruling came through via the Clarity Act. So I think it's very unlikely. The other thing to say is that the international community looks at what does the will of the people imply? What can one garner from the will of the people through a referendum? And the international community accepts the will of the people when a majority rules or votes in one direction. And by the way, that majority is 50% plus 1.
What would Alberta use as currency?
That's a fantastic question. In my ideal world, I am a proponent of a gold standard. But the question is, how would you reform the currency without shocking the economy in such a way that it causes it to crash. Because as you know, we're harassed by this menace of inflation at present, and that has to be fixed. But if tomorrow I said, we're going on a gold standard and a new currency and so on, it would be like forcing a man to jump off a cliff into the water. What we want to do is put him on a slide. That makes sense, make the transition much smoother. And so one of the ideas that we've proposed is what's known as free banking, a free banking system. And the way it would work is this. Alberta would gain independence. And there's nothing that says you can't use a different currency for a little while. So there would be nothing that states we couldn't keep using the Canadian currency in this period of transition. So suppose that next week we became independent. We'd keep, and as far as I'm concerned, using the Canadian currency for at least a little while. As that's going on, in order to make this transition smooth, you could, and you'd have to add a bunch of constitutional checks and balances we don't have time to get into today, but just pretend you could keep the corruption out. You could have a bank that's printing Alberta dollars at a different rate, of course, than what Canadians are. Then, on a given day, we would say, okay, it's time to switch. And now Alberta's on this Alberta dollar, and you could just head to the bank and switch your Canadian dollars for Alberta dollars. But now here's the important part to remember. While that's going on, the government will have also had to have constitutionally enshrined that there can be other forms of tender used in the economy. That is, if you or I want to go to the grocery store and pay for some groceries with a gold-backed debit card, the government can do nothing to say that you cannot do that. What the idea is you introduce competition into the currency market. And so if you want to put your earnings into a private bank that promises to back it by gold, by all means, you're free to do so. Absolutely free to do so. And it forces other banks and other and governments and so on, or the government, to keep inflation and et cetera at bay. Now, while that's happening, you could be beginning to transition Alberta to a gold standard, the actual Alberta dollar. But as you know, at present, we don't have the reserves. They're all gone. So it would take some time to build it up. But that's the easiest way I can explain it, is introducing competition into the currency market so that if one bank or another decided to pursue an irrational policy of inflation, you, as a consumer of currency, could switch banks or switch currencies and thus force that bad bank, so to say, to either rein in the inflation or go bankrupt. That's the idea. The whole point is you have to get government out of, government has a monopoly on the money supply, and they can't have a monopoly on the money supply. That's the problem.
That's the whole idea of getting government out of our affairs. If you look at the governance section of the policy governance document that is being proposed, you'd see that there are only 9 portfolios, which is interesting in and of itself. But one of the things to think about with respect to the currency is what will happen to the Canadian dollar during, just before, during, and after a referendum. The Canadian currency very likely will drop significantly. And so we're not financial advisors, but you might want to think, when we get to that point with the referendum, what currency do you want to put your liquid assets into? A stronger currency.
Are the First Nations people on board with the Alberta Prosperity Project?
That's really a very good question. And I'm going to answer it this way. First Nations were never at the table when Canada became a country. They weren't at the table when Alberta was incorporated. But as a new sovereign constitutional republic, they absolutely would be at the table. On our board, we have a gentleman by the name of Lawrence Corderell. Lawrence is First Nations. He was the First Nations chief, and he's run a $100 million company. And also on our board is the gentleman that I mentioned earlier, Jeff Rath, who's a constitutional lawyer who's looked after Aboriginal affairs for nearly 30 years. He's won cases at the level of the Supreme Court. The two of them together have drafted the Indigenous policy. Lawrence is actually the Vice President of Indigenous Sovereignty for the Alberta Prosperity Project. And they both believe that they will be able to, because they know all of the major chiefs, or the majority of them anyhow, and they believe that that they will bring 90% of First Nations to independence.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the other thing is I don't think we can achieve independence without First Nations being on board. So I think it's really important that they are.
Why do you believe it is not already too late to fall into the Great Reset?
Well, here's the thing to think about. I'm going to remind you of a comment by my great friend who's now passed on, Ray Nelson from Nelson Home, Nelson Lumber. And he said, if you don't stand for something, you're going to fall for everything. So how many people here want to fall over the falls? I don't think anybody does. And so there's always going to be concerns. There's going to be the fearmongers out there that are going to say, well, what about splitting the vote? What about being landlocked? What about pensions? What about this, that, and the other thing? There's always going to be a reason not to do something. But if you don't do anything, like I said before, there are those three options and one of them is the Great Reset, and it's coming at us like a freight train. We have probably the best opportunity to pull this off if we can come together prior to the 2023 election and influence that outcome. And I know we can, because we have the major leaders of the other parties and wannabe leaders as well, who are coming to us, who want to get in front of this train, this movement, this parade, as Ralph used to say, that we're creating. So it's not too late right now. And the other thing to think about is that there are other regions in the world that are starting to stand up against this. They're starting to fight back. They're starting to call out what's going on with this whole Marxist Great Reset program by the elites of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. So it is definitely not too late.
What will become of the pensions of federal government employees and their jobs?
Well, I'll start and then Tanner can add to that from an economic point of view. But in terms of federal employees, well, for one thing, I got to explain something. If you compare business with the federal government or any government, or mainly the federal government, business can produce a product or a service and it costs them $1. For the federal government to provide that same product or service, it costs $3. So there's tremendous inefficiency in the way the system operates, and the bureaucracy keeps getting bigger and bigger. But it doesn't mean there aren't a lot of good people within the federal government. And many of those good people live right here in Alberta. And many of those good people will become employed by the federal government of the new nation of Alberta, but not all of them, because we won't need all of them. So what is their opportunity? Their opportunity is the private sector. Because the private sector, when you have reduced regulatory environment and you have low taxes, this province will be an absolute magnet for business. And they will be creating jobs like crazy. So that's my best response that I can say. But Shannon, you might have something to add to that.
I like that answer. It's government is too big and it has to be smaller. But we also recognize what we're trying to do is, at present, we have a problem, which is in economic terms called regulatory holdup. It means that in this area, investors are not confident about what the future holds. And actually, neither are we, considering what happened with the banks and freezing assets just a couple of months ago. We're trying to eliminate that in Alberta. And so I'm of the opinion, at least, that things that were promised in the past and pensions that were promised have to be fulfilled. It would be unjust to say, well, by circumstances that are not your choice, we're cutting them in half, even though you're 70 years old and living on pension. That isn't right. But that's not to say that we can't change them to new pensions and so on that are coming in. I'm not saying you make them smaller. I'm just saying you could restructure them and so on. So government would get smaller. It has to be made smaller. It's far too big. And as Dr. Modry said, we have what, nine portfolios?
Yeah,
Proposing 9 portfolios, so much smaller than what we have now. And the structures and so on would change. But what has already been promised and what people have therefore planned their futures for wouldn't change. It couldn't change. It would be unjust to do so. So that would be my answer.
It also is useful to remember that Alberta becoming a new nation, and what happens to people's pensions if they're in this new nation be no different than if they were living in France or some other country. You still get your Canadian pension. It's just that the difference is we would be able to significantly enhance it in Alberta. And we don't need to wait long to do that. This could be happening as early as 2026.
Just got a couple questions left here, but I just wanted to touch on something. We always get the question about what is a chapter, and Dennis did speak about that when he was doing his presentation. So a chapter is basically just somebody in the community that gets a group of people together, and you are motivated to spread the word about the Alberta Prosperity Project, and you go out in your community and do that. Get a couple friends together and go ahead and do that. It's really not that difficult. In this room right now, we've got 3 regional leaders. Peter Lungard is over here. He is the regional leader for the North. I think this is your area, right? Yeah. And also over here, Jason Lemieux. He has 2 areas, Region 3 and Region 5. And Pam Koenig is over here. She is Region 6. So what happened was when we started, as Dennis said, we thought, we're going to get, 70 to 90 or whatever of these chapters. But we grew so quickly that we had to divide the province into bite-sized pieces because it was just too much for one person to handle. So we've got 6 regional leaders, and as Dennis said, we've got 139 chapters. We've got 43 people who the regional leaders are speaking to in order to become chapters, and we had 140, a little bit more than that, but some dropped out, on a volunteer conference last night. And so today the phones have been blowing up, the email's been blowing up with people that are saying, hey, how do we get involved? How do we start a chapter? Just call us. Just send us an email. We'll get you going. When we achieve independence, how will free trade work?
A lot better. Go ahead, Tanner, start it off.
I like that, a lot better. That's exactly right. So at present, trade is regulated by the federal government. That's in their jurisdiction. Of course, in an independent Alberta, it would be in our jurisdiction. People often question us, how do we get to ports and so on? But at present, 90+% of our trade heads south of the border to America. The lines, what I mean to say is, are already open. We're ready to trade. We're ready to trade in high capacity. So it's exceedingly exciting, actually, what can be achieved when we have a deregulated province that works for Albertans, so to say, and not those in Eastern Canada that are governing what we do. You want to talk about pipelines? Sure. So even with pipelines, and we go back and forth. It's so much fun up here answering questions. Even with pipelines, 98+% heads south of the border. Does not go to ports. It heads south into America. So even that is open. Now, we had a question from a gentleman just yesterday. It was a great question. He said, well, the pipelines go through Saskatchewan, and then they cut down in Manitoba. They cut just at the start of Manitoba, and then they head down to Chicago and the Midwest and down to the Gulf Coast and so on. And so his question was basically, would we be beholden to Canada if we became independent? Again, I don't believe so, not at all. There's a reason that Enbridge, for example, heads through Saskatchewan, and that is because there are refineries there. So that pipeline in Saskatchewan gets refinery 1, 2, 3, 4. There's one in Moose Jaw, one in Regina, one coming up in Robert, and so on. It makes sense for them to do so. And then it heads south. Keystone is a bit different because it just goes through southern Saskatchewan and then cuts down, which is part of the reason why I imagine we wanted to expand. 1, for expansion, and 2, because the majority of the new Keystone pipeline was kept in Alberta. And Trans Mountain heads to Burnaby, into the Vancouver area. But that's for jet fuel. It's critical because they refine it there in Burnaby and then they send it off to the Vancouver Airport to be used for airplanes. What I mean to tell you is, if in an act of anger, Canada tried to shut down pipelines that were passing through Saskatchewan and Manitoba after we gained our independence, I really believe it would hurt them more than it would hurt us. It would be seen as an attack on the provinces that benefit from that oil, particularly Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Not only so, but the whole point of what is being discussed tonight, and Dennis touches on this so well, is that when independent, we have leverage. We don't have leverage now. Once we're freed of this federal government and this Eastern Bloc that tries to take Alberta and uses Alberta for its advantage, we're able to do what we believe is right and flex our economic muscle, so to say. So if they turned off the pipelines going down south, fine, we turn off the taps to Ottawa and to North Bay and so on, where oil goes. Not only so, but we know that a lot of goods, an exceeding amount of goods, an exceedingly large number of goods are shipped from the Vancouver ports through Alberta to the east. And so we could say, fine, we're putting a tariff on every single good that comes through our province. And if that doesn't work,
A massive tariff.
a massive tariff. And if that doesn't work, we're shutting down trade completely. Not a single good would be let through Alberta until you opened up or let us through those pipelines. And so what I need to tell you is there is so much an independent Alberta could do that it can't presently do. You see, there is so much more control that Albertans privately could have that they do not presently have because we live under these unjust rules and restrictions of the federal government. So I see no issue with it at all. I'm so excited for what an independent Alberta could accomplish with free trade, and that's my answer, unless you have anything more.
Well, the only thing is, that's the right answer, but the simple way to think about it is we're policy locked. We're not landlocked. You know, we'll have international support, even the United Nations on the law of the Convention of the Sea, Articles 124 and 125 give landlocked countries access to tidewater for their goods and services. So, you know, it'd be the transport not just of oil and gas, but coal as well. And Northern BC is already aligned with us. So I think we're not going to have any problem with respect to trade. It will be massively enhanced as an independent nation.
Last question, and then I'll invite you to grab a quick coffee, maybe grab a membership, sign the petition, grab some merchandise. This is a good one. If citizens from other provinces were inspired by the Alberta Prosperity Project, could they join you?
Well, actually, is a very good question, and it's important to understand that Saskatchewan has already started the Saskatchewan Prosperity Project, and we're giving them all of our intellectual property. They can make some tweaks to it to suit Saskatchewan, but I think the dominoes will fall. Alberta has to lead this independence movement, and then I think Saskatchewan will eventually join, and they may have their referendum within days of Alberta having a referendum. Here's something to think about as well. You know, we can save Alberta, and by saving Alberta, we may actually save other provinces as well, because the majority of those people want what we want here. It's just that they don't have nearly the homogeneous population in terms of thinking and attitudes, entrepreneurial spirit, can-do attitude, work ethic that Albertans have. And so that's why we have to leave it. But be sure that other provinces want what we want, and we can give them the roadmap and the example to follow. There's one more.
What about the military presence available to defend Alberta if necessary?
Yeah, another good question. Well, we'll start off, first of all, with understanding that we would be replacing the RCMP with an Alberta Provincial Police Force that is loyal to Alberta. That's number one. Number two is many of the military in Alberta are Albertans or feel aligned with Alberta. And as a new nation, we've already created a white paper with respect to the military. I've had contacts with the U.S. military already, and so it's really a matter of time. when the Republicans win in November the House and the Senate, they'll probably wind up, especially if it's a supermajority, they'll probably wind up impeaching Biden and Harris, which really couldn't happen sooner. And the thing is that from the perspective of the military, there's a tremendous advantage to the U.S. to support Alberta. And that is we give them access to the north. The free trade issue is another thing. But the Canadian military, we don't have to worry about the Canadian military. When there were two Quebec referenda, as you know, and there was no threat of a military intervention in Quebec. So I don't think we need to worry about that. But we would be establishing our own military. And so those discussions would be taking place in detail during the period prior to and after the referendum on independence, the successful referendum on independence.
So let's take a 10-minute break.
Is this your fuel?
Yeah, I think we're leaving now. You going to what's
I've been hearing Miranda and Jeff
go. Here we go. Let's get going. So I really want to go and eat my cookie. There. All right, here we go. Our next guest is from Pincher Creek, Alberta. She was born in Fort McMurray and raised in Blovertown, Newfoundland. When I talked to her last week about her intro, she said, just tell them that I'm short, I'm feisty, and I'm full of life. But I can tell you that she's a lot more than that. She had a 20-year career spanning 2 companies until she chose bodily autonomy over forced experimental induction. She fought hard for basic human rights guaranteed under the Charter for herself and her co-workers of 20 years. But then all of that changed, and she was let go. And on that day, she found out how important it is to stand up for what you believe in, even if you're standing alone. She made the trip to Ottawa with people that she had never met until she hopped into the truck and headed east. She made fast friends, great memories, and was part of the front lines with the trucker convoy to end all mandates. She has joined us at the Alberta Prosperity Project as a chapter leader in Pincher Creek and has been a big part of the membership team at a lot of our events and town halls. Ladies and gentlemen, here with the discussion about corruption and immorality of big business, Naomi Smart.
Thanks, Shannon. I'd like to thank the APP for having me and allowing me to share my story with all of you. I'm going to start by telling you guys that when I was 11 years old, my dad came home with a transport truck. And he said, I'm going on the road. And I went, me too. Let's go. And from there, he taught me how to drive. I went with him for a couple summers, learning the ropes, long haul, driving from Newfoundland to Ontario, Montreal, and everywhere in between. I'm here tonight due to the mandates forcing me out of my employment. And to start out with a little bit of fun, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth?
3 months.
These days, 6 weeks. All right. Until recently, I've spent since 2001 in the Alberta oil sands, working directly for one of the big companies up there in the mine. Forgive me for having to refer to my script. Not very seasoned as a public speaker. I'm just a regular person who's made a way in Alberta, who's had immense success from my 20s into my 40s. I would like the opportunity to share with you what happens when your government doesn't work for you. What happens when your government doesn't care about you? What happens when your government can't be trusted? Regular Albertans like you and me, we just want the opportunity to provide for our families. We want to be good, law-abiding citizens, paying our taxes, watching our kids grow, taking them to hockey, going into the arena with them under any circumstance. Yeah. I will admit that even though I was a very, very committed voter all of my life, I was kind of apathetic, figured that once every 4 years I would go in, I'd vote for my conservative guy, and my job was done. Everyone in this room can agree that, I think you can anyway, that that's what's gotten us to this point. We've trusted that our jobs every 4 years would be all that was required to go forward, be successful, and be prosperous. I am here tonight because I want a choice and I need a choice. I'm here today because I did not want my company to be in control of my medical choices. The very first company that took a chance on me in my early 20s to drive a big truck was an indigenous company in Fort McMurray. I believe Dave Tuckeroo runs the company. It was Tuck's Contracting. We ran water and vac trucks to all the camps and remote sites. I learned a lot at that job. It was that job that allowed me to make inroads on the site that I eventually started working for. I went to work driving 797 trucks, 24M graders, and all sizes of dozers. Once I was done with the equipment, they asked me to go in and try to boss people around, and I kind of like that too. The last company I went to work for, I started with them in December of 2021. And that's a strange time to go to work for anybody. It's been a strange couple of years, and congratulations to everyone here for making it through. It hasn't been easy. COVID, which cannot be ignored in this talk that I'm doing tonight, it cannot be ignored because it has changed every person's life. The company that I worked for had promised in no way would they ever implement a policy that would violate my medical choices and my medical autonomy. It took from May until September for them to totally do a 180 on that claim, and they implemented a 100% compliant workforce policy. And due to my private medical history, which is nobody's business, but mine and my doctor's, I needed to figure something out. I needed to know where I stood with my rights, because I really don't think I could have taken what they wanted me to take. And my doctor agreed with me. My doctor had offered to write me an exemption in August of 2021. I was like, nah, I won't need it. Don't worry about it. I'm good. And a month later, I called him and I said, hey, about that exemption, you think he can help me out? And he went, about that exemption. On September 12th, 2021, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta released a memo to all their members that under no circumstance were they to prepare or give anyone a medical exemption for what companies were asking me to do. I was out in the cold. My 20-year career was flashing before my eyes, and I was like, for the first time in my adult life, I was scared. I was a single mom, a sole provider, and I didn't know what to do, so I called a lawyer. I called many lawyers. The only one willing to take me was a man mentioned tonight by the name of James Kitchen. He works for the JCCF, and he agreed to hear me out and give me a path forward, or at least provide me with, some kind of sane answer as to what my rights were with this outrageous, what I deemed an outrageous policy. So word got around site. It's a small community. A mining community is a very small community, and word got out that I contacted a lawyer, and within 2 weeks we had about 2,200 people sign on to a list that wanted to oppose the mandate or just get our rights, and we didn't proceed with we didn't proceed with legal action at that point. We just submitted to the company that we weren't in agreement and to please reconsider. Please, abide by the charter rights and please reconsider. The company did not respond. To this day, they have not responded. The only thing that they did was let me go without cause on October 26th. This resulted in two things. The company accomplished two things when they let me go. They took food off my table, my son's table, and they scared 2,100 people into getting whatever they needed to get done. 100 people were left standing. These people were put on an unpaid leave as of December 21, 2021. Right before Christmas, yes. These people also lost their Christmas or their yearly bonus, any raises that were given. These people lost out on all of that stuff. Fast forward to middle of March in 2022, which was about 3.5 months, the company released their latest policy stating that April 4th, 2022, you're good to go. No apology, no reconciliation, no nothing. Come back, let's forget about it all. Here's your job. I wasn't one of those people called back. There are several reasons I was hesitant to receive the treatment. First and foremost, I was protecting my bodily autonomy. Last I checked, it was still protected under law. I know deep inside, and I still know to this day, that I made the right decision. It is the hill that I will die on. I'm here to present some facts as they happened. When it comes to the title I'm here under today, which is Immorality and Corruption in Big Corporations. I'm just going to give you a few scenarios as to what has happened and what could have been done to prevent it. During the time when I was first writing this public address, I was invited to say it at the Calgary rally in November 2021. There was a former coworker of mine who had received his second treatment and was hospitalized for a stroke for an extended period. The gentleman was in his mid-40s, otherwise healthy. No correlation to the treatment. After receiving permission from her family, I will share this. A young lady of 26 years old received her second treatment on a Monday. She made a few Facebook posts referencing how she felt about what the treatment was doing to her physically. 5 days later, she was gone. Her family is left with so many questions and not one answer. One more story for you. There's a young mother who worked for this company. She's been harassed by her supervisors for months, even to the point of, if you just do it, you'll get a promotion. We'll get you going on something else. All the things you've ever wanted, we will get for you if you just do it. She just recovered from COVID, and she didn't want to. She wanted them to recognize her natural immunity, which we have.
Yes.
The company would not and still doesn't recognize natural immunity. She went for her first under coercion. She went to the company nurse. Within 15 hours, she was in the hospital in Fort McMurray, unable to move, wheelchair bound, two small children. And to this day, she has medical issues that don't seem to want to go away. Her heart rate skyrocketed. They gave her Ativan. They blamed her immobility on a vitamin D deficiency. These are just a small group of people that I personally know. There are dozens of other corporations in this province and in this country who are doing the exact same thing. And I am here to say I will not let it happen on my watch to anybody else. We need to have the determination and the backbone to take care of our friends and our families and our neighbors. Who else is going to do it? They dangled their salaries. They dangled it in front of these men, these proud men that I worked with. They dangled it. And what are you going to do? You miss a mortgage payment, what are you going to do? They have young families. They don't want to miss anything. They want to keep their kids in hockey. They want to pursue happiness. And the only way to do that was submit to a treatment that 2,200 of them didn't want. These corporations that I speak of are all on the gravy train. I want to let you know that our premier has had upwards of 60 meetings in the last, since January 2020 until October 2021. I counted 60 meetings with pharmacy representatives, executives, companies, sales reps. And mere moments later, corporations in our province were implementing these mandates. My company being one of them. The Minister of Jobs and Innovation in Alberta, which is one posting, one MLA, one cabinet minister, has doled out just over $1 billion in 2021 to corporations. Grants. So he's giving it to people. $105 million has been given to these resource companies for carbon capture. 15 million of it was received by the company I worked for. The government, as far as I'm concerned, played a very active role in ruining my life. I'm speaking for all others who are in the same boat. I wish I could get up here and tell you that my MLA is a rock star. I wish I could get up here and tell you that the people that we trust to keep us happy and healthy and on a good path, I wish I could tell you they're doing their best for us, but you know what? They aren't. All of these things have led me here. This is why I'm here, because in the APP, I have found people who are listening, people who recognize that things need to change, people that recognize that we just want to be prosperous, we just want to be free, we just want to live our lives. My Prime Minister has called me a misogynist and a racist for wanting my freedom to choose. I refuse to accept those titles. I have sent over 80 emails this year alone to my MLA. I have received 0 correspondence from his side. I have made numerous phone calls. I have gone to his constituency office. I've been chased out of his constituency office. He wasn't there, just to let you know, because I've been working from home for a long time. I've talked with other people in other constituencies that have looked for answers from their representatives, from people that are elected to help us, elected to champion for our rights. They get nothing. They've gotten nothing. I've talked to a lady from around this area, actually, whose representative has assured her that he does the work behind closed doors. Don't worry, your voice is being heard. Well, I'm here to tell you that I do not accept that my government works behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So here's where we're at. We want to see a brighter future. We want to see a brighter future for our children. I want my 15-year-old to be able to buy a new pickup truck when he's 30. Right now, that's not in the cards. Under a free Alberta, I'm hoping it'll be in the cards. Let's be the people we want to see in these leadership roles. There's no one else to do it. Are we going to sit back and let them continue to do what they've been doing to us? I want the freedom to choose the best way I want to live my life. I don't need anybody to tell me I'm doing it wrong. What we need to do as a group, as a community, as friends, as neighbors, we need to talk to each other. We need to go back to the bonds that we had before this nonsense came in. We need to get closer than 6 feet apart. We need to hug each other, and we need to know that we're going to be there for each other. I came to the APP with my story, and they graciously allowed me to tell it. Since I've been with them, I have made so many new friends, and I have gained knowledge on how to share the information. Do not feel that you are not able to share this information. It is there for all of us. They are there to help us. They are there to see us to a better way. On the local levels, we need to stand up and be heard. As Shannon mentioned, I'm the chapter leader for Pincher Creek. I moved to Pincher Creek in the midst of restriction. So, and I spent 23 years in Fort McMurray. I know thousands of people up there. Wonderful community, by the way. I just needed a change, and I moved to Pincher Creek. And getting to know people in an environment where your friends and neighbors, or your neighbors, new neighbors, aren't encouraged to welcome you to the community has been a tough go. I'm proud to say that we have 51 members in our Pincher Creek chapter Facebook group. We meet every couple weeks at my house. We talk about community initiatives. What's going to bring us back together? What do we need to do? What do we need to know? And there's a lot of stuff we need to know. We need to know what's going on in our schools.
Yep.
We need to know who the people are that we are just putting the tick against for the trustees, which is what I've been doing. That name looks good. We need to know why they are there. We need to know what they are implementing in our schools. We need to know that even in small town Alberta, the main focus of the social studies program is how is globalization shaping your identity? I'm not okay with that. We need to go to our community chambers, our municipal offices. We need to band together and be heard. The time for standing on the sidelines is over.
Mhm.
We can't do it anymore. Accountability, integrity, and honesty. That's not very much to ask. I'll close with a little story. It was January 24th, 2022 at 7 a.m. 3 strangers met in Calgary to embark on like the biggest trip of our lives. We all just felt it in our hearts. We had to go. And I met a gentleman, and the lady had the truck, and she lives in Lac La Biche. He lives in Grand Prairie. I live in Pincher Creek. We cover every corner, I think. So the rally started at the Flying J in southern Calgary, and there were hundreds of trucks, pickups, campers, you name it, everybody, everywhere, pure pandemonium. Pastor Art was there. He did a morning prayer. Being wintertime, it was still dark, so there was all kinds of lights everywhere. I can't put into words what we experienced that morning. Just as we were in the truck, I was in the back seat, and I said to the driver, I said, wait, stop, I can't go anywhere yet. I gotta go. And she's like, where are you going? I said, I have to go speak to the guy that's driving this truck. So I got out of our pickup, and I ran over, and I jumped up on the sideboards of this big red truck. The truck had freedom, white freedom words all over it. There's a gentleman sitting inside, and he had a big smile for me. And I asked him, can I climb up? Because you gotta ask a trucker, can you climb up? You just can't get up there. And we proceeded to have the most beautiful conversation between 2 strangers I've ever had. He told me his 2 kids were in the bunk, and that they were going to Ottawa. And they were going to get an education in Ottawa. While they were down there, he was going down for the whole time. We knew as a group, our group, we couldn't stay. Just work constraints with the gentleman, he had to be back. So we were going down for 4 or 5 days, and then we were turning around. This gentleman was staying for the whole duration. And as we talked, I felt like this is the absolute reason we are here. We need to teach our kids what's happening around us. They need to know. So I went on my merry way. I was pleased as punch that I went and talked to my trucker guy, and I got back in the truck with our pickup, and along the way, we saw this truck intermittently at our scheduled stops in and out, but I never did see him after. Like, I didn't lay eyes on him after, didn't know his name except the first name. Fast forward to March 2022. So it was about a month later. And the APP had asked me to speak at my first engagement with them. And after I was finished, I went down to speak to whoever at the back, whatever, and this gentleman came up to me and he says, I knew it was you. And I said, hello? And he said, it's me, Sandy, the red truck. So even though the worst thing that could ever happen to anybody has happened to me, there is so much good left over. It's all about the goodness. The Alberta Prosperity Project has become my beacon of light. It has given me hope where I have lost hope in every part. They have policy, sound policy. They have great ideas that are absolutely able to accomplish. We're able to get there. But we need friends, we need neighbors, we need everybody to spread the word. I'm done with the political parties, nationally, provincially. I don't have any hope there. I just, this is where it's at. This is it. This is our hope. I feel it. I know it. It's a place I call home, and it'll be an independent Alberta. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. I forgot to mention that we do pass the bucket at some point during the show, so brace yourselves. Our next guest is a well-known, courageous defender of rights and freedoms. I've heard him speak on many occasions, and I can honestly say that the energy he brings when he gets a hold of this microphone will spark a passion in you that you will want to be part of righting the wrongs of the last 2 years, and then some. He also made the journey to Ottawa in the Freedom Convoy to end all mandates, where he stood strong on the front lines with so many others who had just had enough. He once said, sometimes to do the right thing, one has to stand up and be alone. But when you do the right thing, you're only alone for a moment. He advocates for truth, he advocates for kindness, he advocates for the understanding for those who have had different perspectives. And I can tell you firsthand that his burgers are second to none. He also, so I've been told, makes some very good pancakes. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta, Mr. Chris Scott.
Thank you very much. So now I'm really nervous because she said that I usually bring a lot of energy, and I'm so tired, I am literally falling asleep in my seat. Like it's been a pretty crazy few weeks or months or whatever, and it's actually exhausting. But we keep going, right? Yep. Because we have to. What else are we going to do? We have pretty much, in my opinion, one shot at this. Our government is too big. They're bloated. Yeah. What they do costs $3 for the same thing we do that costs $1. And what does that tell you? We are literally, that image, that cartoon you see sometimes where the people are on their hands and knees and there's a game on their back and these people are playing the game and it says all they have to do is just stand up and the game's over. Yeah. Right? That's been years. But we allow it, we buy into it because it's comfortable and it's easy. It's not easy to speak out against the government or make any waves. It's not easy to speak out against a medical intervention that seems completely ludicrous that's being forced on people, is it? They call you crazy. They try and shun you. They make you a social pariah because you dare to question something. And then they use false flag arguments against you. Well, how dare you question the science? Science is about questions, right? How dare you question the government? That's our job, to question what our government's doing because what they're doing is supposed to be to our benefit. We have some problems. And up until the last 2 years, we were able to manage those problems kind of. Not too bad. We paid too much in taxes. We knew the government was wasteful. We watched our money get shipped to places it should never go. We've watched our paychecks taken from us in the form of taxes, and that money used to fund and subsidize programs and initiatives that do nothing but get people rich. We've watched it for years. And we haven't stood up and done anything about it because it didn't affect us enough. Personally, I love that sweater. That's awesome. I spent almost 20 years in the oil patch. So you can imagine how much taxes I paid. It was a very considerable amount of money. And what I think what that money could have done, the benefit to the province or the community, and then I think of how many people were in the exact same position as me, making that kind of money, paying those taxes, the number is mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling. The things we could accomplish in this province if we had responsible stewards of our resources, and one of those resources is us, tax revenue,
whether it be income tax or consumption tax or whatever, we can literally change the entire world starting in Alberta. And it's not out of reach. So I think it was Dennis who mentioned that leaders from different political parties and organizations and whatnot have been approaching the APP and asking them, what's this all about? How do we get your support? This is what we're doing. Will you get behind us? And that tells me that even those who are politically motivated, who want to get in front of this parade, so to speak, because they want to make government to get paid, feed at the tax trough, they recognize the power of a movement. And this movement is very powerful. And the reason for that is because this isn't something that started out of anger or hate or something like that. You remember Wexit? It was very angry, right? Well, we were all angry. That twit got elected again. And I mean, we were literally ready to saw the province off from the rest of the country. But we were angry. And there was a lot of people who had a lot of hate in their hearts. And that movement they called Wexit grew, and it grew very, very, very fast. That was one of the fastest growing Facebook groups of the up until that point. But it failed. And do you know why it failed? Because it was born out of anger.
Yeah.
And nothing born out of anger will succeed. It might for a short time, but eventually compassion and love and truth will overcome. It always does. Sometimes there's pain and suffering for years in between, but it always overcomes. This is different. The folks that started the APP, they did it somewhat for the same reasons I kept my cafe open. And you might say, that sounds crazy. You flip burgers and serve coffees. How is that anything even close? Well, I opened my business against the restrictions for one reason in the beginning, and that was survival. If I hadn't, my business would have failed. I would have lost the business. That's it. Done. So I had two choices. I could either comply, lose my business, maybe be compensated somehow by the government and just do something else. I could go back to the rigs or back doing something else and make a lot more money. Or I could do what I knew was the right thing, which is stand up and speak up. I knew that what the government was doing was wrong. I felt it. How many people, when this all started, they felt in their heart something was wrong, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it? So most of us, right? Now I want to show hands. How many of you didn't speak out or were concerned to speak out because you felt like you would be alone in doing so? Look around the room. The majority of people that didn't speak out when this originally started did it because they thought they were alone, and they never were. My sister and I, we had these conversations all through January. And it went something like this. Mel, I'm gonna open the restaurant in defiance of restrictions. Is there any kids in the room? And here's my sister. Yes, please, fuck the government. It didn't only go like that. They went more like, what about this? What about that? What do we do after this? Well, they're gonna crush us. How are we we're gonna get fines, we're gonna get this. And I said, yeah, probably, but somebody has to stand up and speak out because everybody thinks they're alone. And when one person stands up, people will see it and they'll follow. Because at the end of the day, we're all very similar as human beings. We all want kind of the same things. Prosperity, health, security, good outcome for our families. And we all feel similar things. So I knew if I was feeling something, there would be probably one or two people out there that were as well. I had no idea it was as massive as it was. So I did, as a matter of survival. And the results were astounding. People from all over the province, then all over the country, then all over the world reached out to me with support, messages of encouragement. Thank you for doing this. We know there's something wrong. You had to, I'm so glad you did this because now people are going to stand up. And I was like, oh, phew. Wow, I thought I was alone. I'm glad there's an army behind me now because this is going to be a big job. What happened? Slowly but surely, they just kept pushing and pushing and kicking until everybody kind of backed down. So, oh, yeah, we'll just wait this one out, kind of thing. There were some people that continued on. They trudged on, and they were kicked, they were jailed, they were fined, they were whatever. But they keep going. And after that first round of restrictions, I had a choice. I had won a little victory against Alberta Health Services. They backed down. They paid the court costs. They actually asked to dismiss everything because they didn't want to fight it. So I could have either gone with that and just kind of faded back into the line and out of the limelight, continued with my business, pouring coffees and serving hamburgers, and probably been comfortable. Or I could have just gone back to the work on the rigs, made way more money, did what the government said, gone on vacation every 3 months again, bought new trucks, bought sleds, bought quads, all of those things that I love doing, but at the end of the day, you can't take them with you, can you? I couldn't do it. And the reason I couldn't do it is because as people realized that they weren't alone, they started to share their stories with me. And the weight of those stories became very, very heavy. Some of the things I heard that had happened to people and families throughout those first few months were disgusting. And it was nothing to do with COVID. It was the government's response to COVID. It was a failure of leadership. It was a failure for those in authority and those who are elected to represent us. It was a failure of them to do what they knew was right. You know, they could have prevented all of this in the first place by stating publicly that your rights and freedoms couldn't be infringed unless it was justified. They could have driven home that message. This is the law we live under. You have these rights and freedoms. They're yours. They're not ours to take from you. You have them. They could have asked us to do stuff. They could have provided justification or proof for the measures they enacted. They didn't. They could have given us tools and resources and education to manage our health, to help stay healthy. They didn't. They said, do this or we're going to jail you like Archer Pulowski. Close your restaurant or we'll jail you like Chris Scott. Jail sucked. I probably will go back. And there's a reason for that. Not because I liked the food. And I had kind of a conversation like this with my mother, and she was not very impressed with me, by the way. I kind of decided that in order to make my point and to motivate people to stand up and speak out and get involved, get their stick on the ice, get some skin in the game, I was probably going to have to get beat up a lot. There's two ways of winning battles. The first one, you go in there swinging, and you knock their block off, and you pummel them to the earth until you can walk away victorious. But that's very violent, and there's a lot of anger, and I'm not that strong. The second way is you do what you know is right, you trudge forward, and you let them kick you, and you let them beat you, and those around you watch, and they'll eventually realize that, you know what, that could one day be me. Maybe I should stand up. Maybe I should get involved here. And that's kind of what I realized I had to do. So there's a lot of people who have, they think that I've just dropped everything and I'm not fighting anymore. But the truth is, I'm not wasting my time. Whatever I do, I want it to have an impact. And Naomi mentioned that this is the hill she's going to die on. I'm not dying on this hill. I'm standing on this hill, and I am going to charge down this hill, and I'm going to do things figuratively. Because it's the right thing to do. And I realized quite a while ago that the legal avenues, the judicial remedies, are probably not our best option. We may not even win. I got a lot of matters before the court right now. I've got 22 charges to answer for. 22 charges. And they're all very similar. Chris did not wear a mask. He fed that person a hamburger. He needs to go to jail. All very similar charges.
So the judicial remedy may not be the right one. There's been some wins, there's been some losses, kind of. There hasn't really been either any wins or losses because what's been happening is stuff has been getting booted out of court. They haven't really heard anything yet. There's a few things in court. The Ingram case, that's a big one. Gray and Rath cross-examining Dina Hinshaw, that's a big one. Which, by the way, I think the court just ruled that she is not protected by cabinet privilege. Yay. It may not be the way to get the outcome we need, which is to have the courts and the government proclaim that our rights and freedoms are paramount above all else, which is the way it should be. That's what Canada is, or what it was supposed to be, what we've been led to believe. But it was kind of an illusion, right? If you're only free when the government says you're free, are you really free? You're not. You're just a little bit more freer than those who are told by the government everything they have to do. So if we can't get a remedy within this system, what do? Change the system? How about tear it down and burn it to the ground? Figuratively. Now, that doesn't mean anything violent. I'm not actually talking about physically tearing things down and burning it. You can picture that if you want, but that's not what I want to do. What has to happen, all of those people who have done these things and trampled on our rights and freedoms, they got to be held accountable. And they're not going to be held accountable in the current system because the system was designed by government to protect government, create more government, and pay the government. It's just the way it is. I mean, we've let it happen for 50 years in this country, and we're not fixing it. Trudeau and Singh, their coalition government, are not going to fix it. They're going to make it worse. The CPC is very likely not going to succeed in winning a majority government and fixing any of these wrongs, righting any of these wrongs. I wish them all the best, but I don't think it's going to happen. And it's not just Alberta that's subject to all this, is it? That's not me. Our friends and neighbors across Canada are dealing with the same problems. So what do we do for them? I've said it a few times. What do? We lead by example. We be leaders here in Alberta where we can make a difference, where there's a big, big appetite to do this. Albertans are a little bit different than the rest of Canada. We tend to, actually, there was a guy in Ontario, let me tell you about it in a second. In Alberta, we tend to cut the chains off our doors when people take them from us, right? Take our businesses. I didn't do that. I wish I had, but I didn't. And also, I don't think I'm allowed to condone breaking the law. But we're a little different. When our families are threatened, when our property is threatened, we defend ourselves. When our futures and our prosperity are threatened, we defend ourselves. We don't go and pick fights, but when we're provoked, we certainly don't back down. So we're a little bit different. We're a little bit Wild West. I see a few cowboy hats in here that would probably agree with me. So I believe in my heart that we have a duty and a responsibility here in Alberta to show the rest of the country how to get out from under this tyrannical federal government that wants us to own nothing and be happy. And if you don't believe me, if you're out there in Facebook land, pounding on your keyboard saying, we haven't lost any rights and freedoms, what are you talking about, you crazy person? This stuff that they want to do is actually printed in black and white. They don't hide it, and I'm talking about the UN, the WF, and some of these other globalist organizations. They literally have it right there for you to read in plain English what they want to do. And it doesn't involve you owning property, owning a business, owning a home, picking what food you eat, anything. It involves 100% complete control over everything you do in the name of climate change. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is fact. And if you're too damn lazy to go and find that information out for yourself, I'm speaking to that lady that's pounding her keyboard right now. Not that one. That's my girlfriend. She doesn't have a keyboard. But if you're too lazy to go find that information and read it for yourself, then maybe you deserve that fate. But I'm not going there. I'm not letting my family go there. And I'm not letting you folks go there either. So a free and independent Alberta. Is it even possible? Well, you heard Dr. Modry speak, you heard Tanner speak, and they spoke a lot of really, really good truth, lots of logic, lots of reason. And you're welcome to fact check that stuff. Do your own research, check it out for yourself. This is 100% attainable. And I am really tired of political operatives telling me that this can't be done because I'm an amateur and I don't know what I'm doing. Do you know what I'm doing? I know what I'm doing. What I'm doing is motivating people to get their sticks on the ice. And everywhere I go, every room I speak to, the consensus is the same. Everybody, most people in Alberta want to be free and prosperous, and they're willing to do the work. Now, I have a question for you, and I need you to be very honest. And I'm going to put you on the spot. Please stand up if you are willing to do the work to protect your and your family's futures starting in Alberta. Awesome. You can sit down. Now, the reason I did that is because I want you to know that you're not alone. And when these folks come at you and say, oh, this is impossible, it can't happen. Oh, we can just, we can fix everything just by by having all the independence necessary, but not necessarily independent. We've heard how that won't work, correct? It will not work. And our premier proved it. Any single policy the federal government has that negatively or adversely affects Alberta, if it's a constitutional matter, we cannot fight it. He proved it when he tried to fight the carbon tax. That should have been a slam dunk. We all knew it. We knew it. Jason Kenney is going to save us. He's going to be the leader and take charge, and he's going to get us some autonomy and independence in Alberta, and he failed. And that should speak volumes to anyone out there who is trying to tell me that I just need to support the idea of a free Alberta within Confederation. It will not happen. I know it won't happen because regardless of what you think of Jason Kenney, that man is a very, very good politician. He knows what he's doing. He's very smart. He's very shrewd. He's very, very sharp. And if he couldn't do it, a slam dunk constitutional matter, nobody can. Except for us. We can do it. Because we are that parade. And when this parade gets big enough, all of these groups across Alberta who want to be your leaders are going to realize that it's actually you who is the leader and they are the servant. They are simply speaking our voices in that house because we can't all fit. Now, lastly, the most common question I get these days is, well, who do we vote for? And here's my answer. Vote for a party or a candidate who supports the idea of Alberta independence, who is willing to ask the question in a referendum. Vote for a party that has policy, governance, and bylaws that protect your rights, your freedoms, your privileges above all else. Vote for a party or a candidate that agrees we have too big of a government and wants a small government. And it doesn't matter if it is a miraculous, crazy turn of events and all of a sudden that's Rachel Notley. She won't do it. That's totally ridiculous. I'm sorry. It wasn't even funny. She's literally a communist. Sorry, Rachel, if you're watching, but I don't like communists. My point is, it's not so much the party or the candidate that's important. It's not so much the banner they're waving that's important. What's important is what they stand for. And that's what this is. APP has laid all that out in plain English. And if you want to check it out for yourself, go to the website, www.albertaprosperityproject.com. It's on there. And while you're at it, read it, get to know it. And then when these candidates come to you and ask for your support, ask them about it. Ask them if they support it. Tell them that you will support them if they support this. And all of a sudden, the political landscape changes. These political assassins and political influencers become less and less important because you're already educated. You already know what the path is. You already know what the platform has to look like for you to be free and prosperous because they haven't done it. For my entire voting life, there hasn't been one politician who has legitimately made things better for me. It's always been either me, my family, or those around me that changed my life for the good or for the better. All about us. We have the power. We always have. And it's time to, just like you just did when I asked that question, stand up and tell them the game is over. We're not living like this anymore. We want a free Alberta. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So that covers our presentations for this evening, and I would just like to leave you with some closing remarks. And I'm not even kidding. We need all of you to join us. We need you to leave this event and be excited about taking back your freedom and your prosperity into your own hands. We need to grow this community, this movement, this growing wave of Albertans who have had enough. This is the people's movement, and it cannot move without you. There is strength in numbers, and Alberta will not be free without the numbers. We've got one chance to secure a future for our children and our grandchildren. We have one chance to gain the freedom and our prosperity, and that is by electing an independent, focused government in 2023. If you think, so I'm going to try to tell you a story here, but it's kind of, sometimes it's hard for me to get it out. If you think that this doesn't matter to the little kids, the kids around you, you got to think again. My granddaughter came to the Medicine Hat event. It was at the end of March, and she's only 8. And at the break, there was a lot of people that wanted some information. How do I start a chapter? Who do I talk to about this? And all those things. She snuck around all those people, pulled on my shirt, whispered something in my ear, and then she ran on back to her seat. Then on the ride home, she said to me, "Grandma, were all those people trying to be members of the Alberta Prosperity Project?" And I said, "Some of them were, yes." And she said, "I hope all of them join, because that's how we're going to win." So this is what we need you to do. We ask that you buy memberships. We ask that you become chapter leaders. We ask that you become volunteers. Create events in your communities that bring people together. Any event that you can think of, create that event. Start a prosperity garden. Share that space with and the bounty from that garden with people in your community. We need to show our friends and our neighbors that there is hope. We've planted the seeds of hope here today. We've planted the seeds of change here today. We need you to go out and grow those seeds. You need to talk to your friends and your neighbors and encourage them to attend one of our events or watch the videos online. We've got a vision for our community of Alberta, and we're building a community within ourselves, and we want all of you to join. Our community is growing. Like I said, we had 140 people on that call last night. Our solution, with no politicians at our table, is to unite 500,000 to 1 million Albertans or more. That's something that's never been done before. We're creating history right now with this movement. And I encourage you to be on the right side of history. A true community is not about being geographically close to someone or a part of the same social network. It's about feeling connected and responsible for what happens. Alberta is our ultimate community, and everyone here has a crucial role to play. We must become bigger than we have ever been. We must be more courageous than we have ever been, greater in spirit, larger in life. We must become members of a new race of Albertans, overcoming petty prejudice, owing our ultimate allegiance, not to the government, but to each other. and Alberta will become a sovereign constitutional republic, one where the First Nations people sit at the table as partners in the creation of the new nation of Alberta. And on that great day, Alberta truly will become united, strong, and free. Thank you very much. God bless.